Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Digital Nomad World weekly series. I'm Becky, and I'll be your host. And today we're going to be talking about the employer of record business with my guest, Irina Dzhambazova. Irina, welcome to the show.
Hi, Becky. Thank you. It's great to be on the show.
Thank you. And now, Irina, we just met a few days ago and we were talking, and you told me about the business that you're in. And I was very intrigued because I hadn't heard about it before, but it's something really important to remote workers. So I'm really excited to get into it with you. But before we do, I would love to hear how you got started as a digital nomad and more about your background.
Absolutely. Happy to, Becky. So I'm Irina Dzhambazova. Fair play for pronouncing my last name. That is an excellent pronunciation, Becky. Just wanted to say that. So I am currently the head of marketing of a company called Boundless, which is an employee of record. We're going to get to that in a second. But my journey of being a remote worker slash digital nomad goes back to about 11 years ago, where very serendipitously I met someone, a Scottish guy running an American consultancy, kind of running all around the world. And we met through a mutual connection. We thought we're just going for brunch. But towards the end of it, he ended up offering me a job, which was kind of like the dream job of going around the world and writing case studies for companies that he had been consulting, and they were using his methods and practices. And I had dreamed of a job that gets me and sees me traveling since I was a kid. Now, I thought at the time that I have to be a banana trader or something. I didn't think a case study writer would get me there. But because the company was based in the US, at the time I was living in Bulgaria, I would be the remote worker, case study writer for the company. So I started doing that back then. Digital nomadism, going to cool places is the one where you and I are nowadays, wasn't really a thing. So I was the remote worker, but I was, back home. I was in Bulgaria, I was going to a coffee shop or an office. And it took a while before I started really embracing, well, I can be a remote worker anywhere, with its limitations. So I have to say I've been a remote worker for 11 years, a digital nomad properly for about a year and a half.
Wow. I mean, do you ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't met this person?
Yeah, it was a little bit like the bunny coming out of the hat. It was incredibly serendipitous. I was working for a bank at the time. I was in public relations. I hated it. It was nothing like me, and the corporate world was killing me. And I'd been thinking of getting into content, and I just randomly mentioned it to him. And I'm a journalism background, but I hadn't really done journalism. And he's like, "Well, this is going to sound very odd, but I've been looking for a case study writer with a journalism background. Would you be interested in going to these companies around the world and writing about this?" And I was like, will I be interested? Yeah, I will be. And it was a bit of a learning curve, but I thought many times, what if I had not gone to that brunch? What would have happened? And with that job, I ended up moving to Ireland, which became my home. And then that just put me on a trajectory of working remotely, writing, and as you know yourself, producing content. It's something that you can do from anywhere as long as there's good Wi-Fi. So yeah, I do wonder, but sometimes I regret that at the time I didn't do this as much. And I remember I had this idea. I remember I was in Portugal sitting in a coffee shop and thinking, oh, life in the Mediterranean is so lovely. I could do this in the summers. I could, one summer in Portugal, one summer in Greece. What would that be like? Maybe I can even write a book about it, what I've learned about, life and living from, spending time in the Mediterranean. But I don't think I gave myself the permission at the time. No one was doing it, no one was openly talking about it. And so it came, it was left as this thing that I just had as an idea, and I never did. And then last year I went to Athens for 2 months, and I was almost, I felt like finally, 10 years later, when everyone else is doing it, I'm doing it as well. There's probably not a book in there because now everyone does it, but it's like, yeah, 10 years too late. But then at the same time, I try to be kind to myself, and it's like, I did it, better late than never, I suppose.
Absolutely. And what made you finally start living like you said, like everybody else was doing as a remote worker about a year and a half ago?
I think as a lot of the people you and I meet in places that are digital nomad hubs, it's COVID was the big thing. Like in COVID, we saw, our freedom to travel, completely taken away from us. We were stuck in our homes, wherever they were. And as soon as things eased off, the wanderlusters of this world, like us, were just like craving even more to do it. Now, what also allows me to do it is that I work for a company that is built on the fundamentals of people should have the freedom to live where they want, and they should not have to pay any sacrifices for this. They should not be forfeiting their rights. So my company allows for a lot of flexibility. So I can do within 6 months out of the year, I can do this in different countries. I still have to keep my tax residency in Ireland, and I know we'll get to that in a minute for something very important for remote workers to know. But for the rest of the year, I can do this, and just I think the stars aligned, the right company, the right time, the right mindset, I suppose. And I remember, I was coming from a holiday in Greece in the summer, and I was thinking, oh my God, another winter in Ireland. It's going to be gray and cold, and it would just be so hard. It'd been so hard for the past few years. It's like, how about no? How about no one's making me do this? I don't have to do this. And I was in between at the time. I was thinking of going to Crete, but will the weather in November, December be good? And then I literally Googled female solo traveler safe. And a listicle, as they do, popped up. First was Bali, second was Chiang Mai in Thailand, and then 3, 4, I don't remember what it was, but the Bali one was because I have a co-living, co-working that was known for being a great community and being great for travelers. Never thought about Bali before. I'd never been like, oh, I want to go to Bali. And I just emailed them, fully expecting them to say, oh, we're fully booked for the next 3 years or something. And they said, yeah, we have 5 weeks available from mid-November until Christmas. This is what it costs. Yeah, you have 24 hours to book it. And I was like, okay. And I booked it. And I told my boss, so I'm going to Bali for 5 weeks. Is that okay? And let me remind you, there is an 8-hour time difference between Bali and Ireland. And then she was like, amazing, go. And that was kind of it. And then I went to Italy, I went to Greece, I went to Portugal. Now I'm in Vietnam. So that's it. Kind of. It was the first time. And from then on, it's like, there's no going back.
Yeah, it's very hard to put that genie back in a bottle once you let it out and you start going places for sure. Now, you've already talked a little bit about it. You work for a company called Boundless, and it's in the employer of record business. We are now going to explain what this is. So can you tell us, what is this business and how did you get into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So an employer of record is essentially an organization whose sole purpose of existence is employing people on behalf of other companies in jurisdictions where they don't have entities. So what does that mean in plain language that you want to explain to your granny? You are working for an Irish company, but you want to live in Portugal, but you don't want to give up the company that you work for. You don't want to give up your job because you really enjoy it. So there's 3 options of how you might be employed. One is you set up your own company, and you start sending invoices, essentially an independent contractor. That's the most common route, but it's the most problematic route because pretty much in every country's legislation, particularly in the EU and Europe, you can't really be an independent contractor if you work for one company alone and you give your full time and attention to them. Independent contractors is if you're a freelancer and you do a bit of work for this company and for that company. So even though it's really easy because the company just gets an invoice once a month, they don't have to worry about employer taxes or anything like that. It is problematic, and it's also not great for the person because as an independent contractor, they usually are not as covered by the laws and rights and protections that the country extends to employees. The other option is for the company to establish its own entity, right? Fully legal. In most countries, not too difficult in the beginning in terms of like, let's just set up a company and payroll and all that. But then every month, you still have to take care of payroll. Every year, you have to be on top of legislative changes. And it can quickly turn into a lot of work. And especially if it's a smaller company, and the only reason why it has presence in this country is to employ someone, it's just too costly and too time consuming for the HR to be dealing with this. So that's where an employee of record comes in as an alternative to all that. So a company gets into a commercial relationship with an employee of record where it essentially gives the legal responsibility of the employees to that company. So my company, for example, would have an entity in Portugal and then becomes the legal employer of your legal employer. So that means that you have a contract, depending on the country, either it's a three-party contract with the company you are working for, the employer of record, and yourself, or maybe it's just with the employer of record. Then there is a separate relationship between the employer of record and the company. And then your payroll, your salary is covered by your legal employer, your taxes are filed by them, insurance, benefits, all these things are taken care of. So essentially, the company that you work for, the only thing that they're concerned about is the work you do for them, none of the admin things. As a model, it started in the 60s in the US because of the cross-state policies. If you live in New Jersey, but you you work in New York, where do you pay taxes? Well, you have to pay taxes where you reside rather than where you work. And it was pretty simple statewide, and how it was handled. And it was particularly for tax reasons. And then about 15 years ago, a couple of companies started doing this across borders and establishing entities or working with partners, whatever it is. So then Boundless was started in 2019 because the founders had essentially run into these same challenges that I described about, well, we have this employee that wants to move to Croatia, or we have this person that has always wanted to live in France, or they want to go back to their family. And, trying to solve this. And at the time, funnily enough, even though there were a couple of employers of record, no one was really talking about it. So for them, it was very hard to find, the answer to what they were trying to solve. So they went ahead and they solved it and built the company in 2019. Now, how I found myself in the company is that one of the founders is one of my closest friends in Ireland. And at the time, I was not massively happy with the job I was having. I was looking to do some freelance content writing. And she was like, look, I know you're looking for something freelance. Do you want to write a few posts for us? And at the time, I didn't either understand what the company was. I thought it was something international, payroll or something. I was like, maybe it's going to be a bit boring. But you know what? Let's just do this while I find something else. And then as I got into it, I realized, it's way more than just payroll. It's employment rights. I knew exactly how it felt back when I first had my remote job that I mentioned to you earlier, because I was an independent contractor. I had to establish a company. I had to do my taxes. I had to work with lawyers and accountants, and it's not my strong side. And I really disliked it. But at the time, no one knew that this employer of record existed. So as soon as I got into it, I really, really enjoyed it, and really have ever since, because it's so interesting. It helps companies, but mostly it helps employees to not have to deal with any of the admin that comes with independent contracting, and feel safe wherever they decide to go home.
That is incredible. And yes, I really think not a lot of people know about this, but also at first the ins and outs of how it works. Because when people hear the word taxes, I think also the brain starts to shut down and so often. But let's walk through an example here using you talking about Ireland. So if you wanted to move to Portugal, like you had mentioned, how would that work in terms of, would you approach your company in Ireland and say, I want to live in Portugal. I guess that would be step one. Is that correct?
That would be correct. Yeah, I would say, and again, if the company allows for such flexibility, I'll go to them and say, hey, I'm a little bit sick and tired of the weather here in Ireland. I would love to move to Portugal. I've heard of this thing called an employee of record. I don't know if you know it or not. You wouldn't have to do any infrastructure and set up companies and deal with my contracts and payroll. You would be able to work with them. So that's if I'm a knowledgeable remote worker. Oftentimes, what happens is we're actually approached directly by companies because they've had that person asked to move to Portugal, and then they start looking at what are their options. And funnily enough, most HR people would assume they just have to go start an entity, set up payroll, and do everything themselves. And they research what are the things that they have to do to, set up all that. And then they come across employer record. Now, the world is very different nowadays than it was 5 years ago when the company was started. Definitely, employer record is a much better known concept. A lot of companies have had experience with it. There's a big number of companies that are in the space. Employer record became the sexy thing in COVID because everyone was moving, back home or to wherever they dream to live. So it is a known concept nowadays. But most often it would be HRs looking for a solution when the person comes to them. But when the employee comes to them, and they say, hey, there's this thing, employer record, here, read about it. It's a great thing as well, and it's a fully legal and very easy way to go about it.
Right. So if I had approached, my Irish company and I said I want to move to Portugal, am I moving to Portugal like for full time from that point and working for this employer of record that has been set up in Portugal? Or do I still need to be in Ireland 6 months a year or more for taxes, but this is kind of allowing me to go to Portugal for like 3 months or something? That's what I'm not sure about.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. So essentially, if you are planning on remaining in Ireland for 6 months or more, so I'm that example, right? I'm a tax resident in Ireland. I spent 5 months and 30 days in other countries. Employer record is not needed here because I am still in the country of my tax residency. I am still in the country where my contract is, where my taxes are paid. That's fine. It gets complicated the moment you surpass what in a lot of EU countries, the rule is where do you spend 183 nights, not even days, it's 183 nights. That is where your tax residency. So if I'm planning to spend 183 or more in Portugal, I need to be a tax resident in Portugal, which means I need to have a contract there. I need to pay my taxes there. So if you are the one moving from Ireland saying that's it, I want to give Portugal a try, I want to spend the majority of my time there, then your company would engage us or any of the employers of record out there, and they're going to start a commercial agreement. Then kind of the onboarding is kicked off where while you get your own little registrations that you have to do in Portugal as a resident, social security or whatever it is. Every country has some form of registrations like that you have to do. Then your contract is created, and then you are officially employed by the Portuguese entity. You pay taxes in Portugal. It's always an interesting question that we hear, how salary is impacted. So even though EU countries tend to be in like this kind of economic relationship between each other, employment taxes are vastly different in every single country. There is no unified EU or European even tax system. The taxes I pay in Ireland are very different than the taxes in Portugal, than the taxes in France. If we get into that, it's about that amount of taxes. So the salary will be impacted, kind of the take-home pay. You may be paying more or less. The company will be paying more or less, kind of depending. But yeah, other than that, if you're prepared to, kind of take whatever that is or negotiate, okay, I'll be paying more taxes here, so can I get a little bit salary bump or whatever it is, and then you're good to go.
All right. And then if I had asked my Irish company and they are, thinking about using employer of record, I imagine they need to pay Boundless or the employer of record company. Is it a monthly fee to use the service, I imagine?
So with us it's a percentage of the payroll that's being processed, kind of depending on the levels of service that that we kind of give you. Is it employment, or is it employment plus different consultations and stuff? Some of the other providers have monthly fees. Some providers have like per seat. So kind of everyone figures out their own pricing model. For us, we've seen that the fairest thing tends to be percentage fee of the payroll that we process.
Every month, I'd imagine.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, just getting this like clear picture of like if I want this new arrangement, what it's going to cost my employer to set it all up. As you've said, a lot of that paperwork is going to get taken off of their plate, but there are fees involved. So I would try to think of the best and most beneficial negotiation to come forward with to make it happen. If I especially want like better weather or, a better, what I think is going to be a better standard of living in that new
Exactly.
place.
No, totally. I mean, it's interesting. I remember reading statistics somewhere that if people are given flexibility, and that's not even geographical flexibility, they're allowed to work remotely, from their home, whatever. They see this as kind of like getting like a 10-15% bump of their salary in terms of like the benefit of that. And they're prepared to sometimes even take this as a decrease just to kind of get that freedom. Now, my opinion, you should not be, taking any salary sacrifices and anything, for this, because this is pure freedom. And your company should be so lucky that you found a place that makes you happy and you can do your job. And geography just kind of really does not need to matter whatsoever. But that's my personal opinion.
No, that is the opinion to go in with when you start this negotiation.
That's it.
And
Yeah.
is there any like I would say like if I'm American, could I move to Indonesia in Bali? And would an employer of record be able to help me there? Are there any kind of barriers in terms of which country you can move to from which country based on taxes and all of those other things?
So in terms of employment and taxes, no. In terms of immigration, possibly. So this is where it can get a little bit complicated because, again, I'm very fortunate. I'm a EU member state resident. I live in a EU country. So for me, freedom of movement within any of the countries in the EU is very, very easy. But oftentimes you have to remember not everyone out there is from the EU or moving to EU. So that's where immigration comes in. And as everything that I'm going to tell you when it comes to taxes or employment, it vastly varies. You'd have to get immigration advice. Sometimes we offer that, and we can advise as well. In certain countries, the employer of record can act as a visa sponsor, which is if you need a visa, you're going to need a visa sponsor. And usually that will be the company that you work for, again, because they don't have an entity, who is then the visa sponsor, the employer of record in countries where that's allowed. The UK, for example, unfortunately doesn't allow for an employer of record to be the visa sponsor. But in Australia, you can. So it really will be understanding what is the Indonesian legislation for immigration, what is their treatment towards American citizens, what is the treatment of who is given a visa permit to work from there. So usually high skills tend to very easily get sponsorship, but some countries might also give preference to locals. So in Singapore, for example, there is a definite preference given to, first you need to prove that you've tried to hire at least 3 Singaporean citizens before you try to hire a foreigner. So there's all of these little intricacies that you have to research in addition. But when it comes to tax, employment, you can be anywhere. That's no problem at all.
All right. Now I'm wondering if, like, I know that we have been using Ireland and Portugal. They are both in the EU, so that's an easier case. But no matter where I go, let's say I was in Ireland and now I want to move to the US. would the employer of record be the one covering my medical insurance? How does the medical insurance work once you move to the US?
Yeah, so that's an excellent question. And again, depends with every country. With the US, and also it depends on what are the views of the employing company, right? The company that you're actually working for. To my knowledge, pretty much every company employing anyone in America gives medical insurance because you cannot not do it. So if the company that you're working for is saying yes, medical insurance, absolutely, we cover it, it will basically be calculated as part of payroll. That and we make the calculations, and then the employee will automatically get it. Now, what it may say in the insurance, and again, I definitely am not in position to give very detailed advice on this because I don't know, and I'm always very conscious of like saying what I don't know. But the way it works in most countries is whether it's a statutory thing that everyone has to give it or the company elects to give private health insurance. They just, we set that up for them, and then that's processed through payroll.
Okay. I know there are so many different, intricacies with different countries, and the US is an anomaly when it comes to medical insurance. But yeah, I assuming when you get everything set up, you will be covered by medical insurance by your company,
That's
whether
it.
it's
Yeah.
the original company or the employer of record.
Totally. Yeah. An employer of record can set up insurance, can set up pension, can set up all sorts of benefits. And you'd actually be surprised, even though I know America is the main case for medical insurance, more and more countries, private insurance is pretty much expected from the employer. It's the same in Ireland. Everyone wants a private insurance, and any reputable employer will have to have health insurance set up. Oftentimes, they would have to have a pension scheme set up as well. And that really helps, again, when you're venturing into a new country with an employee there, instead of having to figure out the insurance system, the pension system, the employer of record comes in and has all of that sorted out for you.
With taxes in the new country, like let's say Ireland to Portugal, if I'm the one that wanted to move to Portugal and I convince my employer that I want to move there, am I then responsible for figuring out how to pay the taxes for the country, or is my employer still the one guiding me, making sure I'm doing it?
Yeah, so in this case, it's the employer of record that's guiding you. So you don't have to figure out anything. And that's the whole premise of the whole employer of record thing, is that as an employee, you should be taking care and thinking about only your work, not taxes or anything. So as an employer of record, for example, we are set up in nearly 30 countries at this stage. So for us to say we're set up in a country means that we've studied the system thoroughly. We understand the taxation. We have a legal partner there. We have an HR partner. We have a payroll partner. So they tell us all of these things. So we know exactly what we need to set you up for, when the payments to that needs to go out, and make the payment. So you don't worry about any of that. You get your your salary and your pay slip at the end of the month. You communicate with your company and your work. You would have been onboarded with us in the beginning. You have a login to our platform where you can see your payslip, and the login is always with your personal email rather than your company one, because one day when you leave that company, you should still have access to your data, because payslips are really important for mortgages, for any kind of loans. So you should always have access to them. But from then on, you don't really communicate with us unless you have any questions, if anything's unclear. From then on, it's just you doing work with the company you work for.
Right, that is really good to hear. And I've been a freelancer for a little while now, so to even imagine that I was getting all this help, just that would have been so nice. It's nice to know there are companies out there helping employees and employers with us.
Yeah, that's it.
Now, is there anything else? Are there any other issues that people who are trying to be remote workers or digital nomads, when they are employees, may not be aware of when they first try to apply online for a remote job or something like that?
Yeah, it's a good question. So my advice would be, don't accept a fully remote position for one company as an independent contractor. It's simply not a good idea. The company could get into a lot of trouble, and more governments have been really keeping an eye on what's the relationship. Because essentially, a government's role is really to protect an employee. Because it's not enough just to get a salary. You know, employment relationship is a very complicated thing. It's a power imbalance. So the government comes in to really protect the employees, to, you know, make sure that they have all their rights and their benefits. And you kind of lose all of that when you're an independent contractor. In an ideal world, you gain a lot of freedom, but that's in the independent contracting sense of the word, where it's actually independent, where you don't have to come in at a certain time, you don't have to, you know, do anything, you know, very strictly the way an employee does. So my advice would be, just don't accept that. It's not a good idea. It's problematic if you need healthcare in the country, because you wouldn't be as covered. It's problematic for loans and mortgages because they do want stable employment and they do not see independent contracting as a stable employment. And then the company could get in trouble as well. So there's a lot of repercussions. The other advice really would be to understand the concept of tax residency. And, you know, being a digital nomad is fabulous and I love it. But tax residency, it's important to be aware of that. You know, you really need to be in a certain country certain period of time. Most countries is around 6 months. I know Cyprus is 2 months. So read up on the tax residency laws in the country, and try to be within those. Because again, as an individual, you could get into a problem. Like, well, you're not really a tax resident here, and it's a little bit unclear what happens. I think, again, governments are a little bit slower to catch up with where we are in how we work. But being a tax resident in a country and spending the 183 nights is a very good idea. And also be mindful of health insurance and travel insurance. I think sometimes you can see health insurance, like a global health insurance, really being a travel insurance, kind of reading, kind of the small print and see, is there a certain amount of time that is maximum for you to be in the country for that to be valid? And if you've been there longer, maybe the travel insurance won't kick in, because again, if something happens and you need to go to the doctor, that's about the last thing you want happening, you being denied healthcare. These would be some of the more important ones.
Yeah, it's very important. I know it's not sexy for people to think about these things. They don't want to think about taxes. They don't want to think about medical care, but it's the most important things, the things that can get you into the most trouble. So I'm really glad we're covering this. I have another question for you. I have really, since the pandemic, I've met a few nomads who were like secret nomads. They were working for like a German company and they said, I'm not allowed to leave Germany for like tax and medical medical insurance reasons, but I'm actually there in Bulgaria when I met them, and they had been there for a couple of months in secret. What advice would you give to these people?
Oh, I remember when there was an article that came out a couple of years ago, and it painted remote workers in this really negative light. It's like they're liars and they do this and they're like in these countries. And I really hated it. It's like it's these typical articles and headlines that they're only meant to shock. I mean, my advice would be, and again, I really hope that, everyone works for a company that's at least a little bit open-minded, and that they can talk to them and be like, look, this is really important for me. I don't feel happy right now. I don't feel like I belong here, whatever it is. I'd really love to, spend 5 months of the year in Bulgaria or in Portugal. Can we find a way for me to do this? It's just very tricky when you do it in secret, because I think it's all about, what if something goes wrong? What if they need to go to the doctor, or they have an accident or something? It could really jeopardize the relationship with the company. They can be seen as, deceiving. It's just having an open conversation is just better. Also, for me, I hate how this puts so much of the onus on people. The onus should be on companies. you have seen this. People can do this from everywhere. And as long as they keep, insurance and tax residents, that companies should really be allowing this. It's a no-brainer at this stage, and there is plenty of companies out there that they're doing this. And if companies don't allow for that sort of flexibility, they're going to start losing on talent, and that's, to me, is the biggest fear that they should be having. So for the person working secretly, I don't know, just try to have a conversation with your company. It's best for everyone if this is out in the open, so you don't have to hide your IP. And I remember reading an article about a guy working for a UK company, living out of Thailand. And clearly there's a big time difference. So he would always read upon the news on what the weather was like in the UK. So if there was torrential rain in Thailand and it was nice in the UK, you'd have to figure out how to mute the noise of the storm, or like he would have to work on the lighting of the room, and like all of these crazy things. People should not have to go through this. It's just crazy. So ultimately, if your company says no, there's plenty of companies out there that are much more open-minded and much more trusting. So it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to be living in that secret, because it's just not good.
I can only imagine how much better work he would be doing if he wasn't also juggling the weather in his mind and, the shades in
I
his
know.
room. And so, okay, on that note, how do you see this employer of record industry changing in the next few years? Do you think it's going to become easier or harder to work remotely from another country as an employee?
It's an excellent question. And I think probably some of the employers of record will kind of, and I think some of them have already started doing this, are going to start to lobby with governments to kind of ease off a little bit of the legislation around employment, around taxation, around just making it easier for people to, move freely. I think we, in an ideal world, are going to start seeing some sort of, and you and I are in Vietnam, right? And one of the things that happened a few months ago was, from a 1 month visa, the visa is now increased to 3 months, which I think makes a massive difference. And I think Vietnam was really looking at other countries. I think Portugal, that we've spoken about, is really good at its kind of very early on in COVID. They started pushing the expat visas and the digital nomad visas. So I think a lot of governments are going to catch up, or hopefully will be catching up on that. And employers of record have a room to, kind of keep talking about this and influence. I think, purely from what's going to happen with the space itself, I think there's quite a few cowboys out there. The thing with employment is it's not an easy thing at all. And you have to take it with like utmost care, because you're taking the responsibility for these people, for the fact that they get paid on time, and getting paid on time and in their accurate amount is essential for someone's well-being. So you can't just take this at a whim. And that was the thing, COVID made remote work a thing. So all of a sudden there were millions of companies, and not all of them are doing a good job at that. And I think the moment you take responsibility for someone, you have to make sure that you can do this the right way. So Boundless's trajectory in that sense has been a little bit different from a lot of the players in the market, where we didn't do the hyper growth thing known in tech. We did this in a very steady pace, and to this day we do it in a very steady pace, where for us, compliance and doing this the right way, following all the models in every country, because they can differ, following it like very strictly, and making saying a company, look, you can trust us, your employee will be fine, we won't take any shortcuts. So I think the space itself, some of the ones that have been taking shortcuts, they may start getting into a bit of trouble, because this is no easy business, and you have to take it with a lot of love and care for the employee.
Yes, payroll is a serious business, and so, as we know, are taxes. Thank you so much, Irina, for sharing all of this information with us. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us that we haven't covered?
I think we've talked loads about employment and taxes. Probably people would need to listen a couple of times to kind of process it all. But I would say, yeah, definitely be mindful of the non-sexy parts of remote work and digital nomadism. I think employment and taxes matter, but also you should never be asked to give those up just in order to gain the freedom. There's companies out there that can help. I would suggest to people to check out our website and our blog. That's where my journey started in Boundless, writing about all of these things, explaining them quite thoroughly. We wrote a really long post about, and maybe I can send you the link that you can share, what's the repercussions for an employee if they are employed by an employer of record. I use my own story that I shared in the beginning with my first remote job as an example of why when I was doing it the independent contracting way it wasn't great, and why I wish there was something like an employer of record at the time. So just read up on it. I'm sure you pop my social channels in there as well. So always feel free to have a chat with me or any of my colleagues. We're always there to help and help people understand this. It's not an easy thing. It's a bit of a learning curve, but the point is there's help out there. There's a lot more help and talk than there was 5 years or 10 years ago. So you can do the remote work in a fully compliant and safe way. That's the message I would like to leave people with.
Thank you so much. And yes, anyone listening or watching, you can find all the links in the description. Thank you, Irina. I'm glad that you found
Thank
a
you,
better
Becky.
setup for yourself. And even employers who are watching this, if you have an employee you had a conversation with and you feel like they might be trying to leave the organization, this is a way where you might be able to make an agreement and it will be much easier for you to keep them, because good talent is hard to find.
It is, and we've seen that offering flexibility, specifically geographical flexibility, has a massive impact on just the happiness of people. I would suggest for people to definitely check out Nick Bloom. He's a Stanford researcher that talks loads about working from home and looks at statistics of how it impacts people, how it impacts companies, how it impacts their revenues. Giving any sort of flexibility as a perk. So if you want any sort of justification for why you should do this, look him up. I would also suggest to people to have a look at Atlassian's distributed 1,000 days of distributed work. They wrote a fabulous ebook around their experience of really introducing remote work and geographically distributed remote work in the last 1,000 days, and they've seen remarkable results. They have great suggestions, like really granular advice on how to manage people, how to make sure that they're productive and connected and all that. So resources are out there. So definitely, that's not an excuse not to do it. There may be other excuses, but lack of information is not one of those.
Thank you for that. And we'll try to put a link to that as well. That sounds amazing to check out. Irina, I hope you have a wonderful day and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Becky. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.